having got our bearings in Isaiah, being able to place him, what he's saying, who he's speaking to in the right context, we can turn to chapter 40 and think of it in light of chapters 1 to 39. And actually, 1 to 39 was full of judgment. Judgment and promises, judgment and hope. But in the peaks and troughs of prophecy, then judgment, the troughs, is very clear from chapters 1 to 39. And as the people have been carried off into exile and are hearing this from exile, no doubt they are thinking that judgment has fallen, and it has. They are sitting under judgment as they sit in exile. But for the people who hear the start of chapter 40, there is a big shift in tone. There's a surprise in what is said. Did you notice it when it was read? He starts off and says, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God." You hear that? Comfort, take comfort. And he says it twice. Twice, I think, because it's so surprising. Comfort. We've just been hearing about judgment, terrifying, unbelievably, inconceivably big judgment. And at the start of chapter 40, off the back of chapters 1 to 39, comes, "Take comfort, my people. My people, says your God." And throughout chapters 1 to 39, we've been seeing a fractured relationship between God and his people. Not because of God, but because of his people, because of us. Turning our backs, deciding not to listen, defiantly rebelling against our Creator. While that's not us specifically being talked about in chapters 1 to 39, we are very much in that camp. We are those who are deserving of judgment. And so as we kind of sit with the listening remnant in exile, we feel the weight of the judgment that they are experiencing and are expecting. And as we sit with them and feel that, and then we read these words, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God." So we feel with them, wow, really? It's a kind of a tentative sigh of relief. Take comfort, says God to his people. And I say it's a tentative sigh of relief because actually, can the people, the listening remnant, can they really take comfort? If they are able to take comfort, if there is hope for comfort rather than judgment, for peace rather than war, for a reconciliation rather than hostility, then that means that something has to be done about not just the judgment they're in now, but the judgment that is to come. This comfort that's being talked about is not so much comfy, get comfy on your sofa, or stepping out of your comfort zone kind of comfort. We're talking about a deep-seated, far-reaching, long-lasting comfort, a peace, a sigh of relief that's more than just a breath, but actually a long-lasting relief. Some commentators talk about it as renewal. There's kind of almost new breath, new life in this phrase, comfort. And so you can see that from the people's point of view, from the original hearer's point of view, they're hearing it and thinking, yes, yes, I want that comfort. But is it really available to me, to us who are in exile, who have a broken relationship with our God, who are feeling hopeless? And yet, Isaiah 40, comfort, comfort my people, says your God. And in that very phrase, my people and your God, we have a kind of ownership, a relational intimacy that off the back of 1 to 39, we're thinking that there's no possibility of that. And so as we hit chapter 40, we're thinking, okay, so how is it possible for comfort, for peace to be available to those who are facing judgment. And it makes us take a step back to that bigger question that we mentioned last time of the promises of God, the peaks in chapters 1 to 39 have come along with the promise of judgment as well. So our question is, well, how can anyone come through that judgment and gain these new creation promises? Is it really possible that the promises of hope can be true if the promises of judgment are true? And that's the crunch question. And as we sit with the listening remnant, we feel it. We think, what a burden. How can it be reconciled? And for us, as believing Christians, as we look back at the cross, we kind of have the same question. Well, is the cross really capable of reconciling that crunch, that question? Does the cross mean that we really can trust God's promises? And it's kind of the same thing. So can the people who are listening take comfort? Can they be sure of the peace that is promised in those promises of hope, in that new creation reality? And so as you go through these verses 1 to 11, it breaks into three voices really. We have three voices who are giving the reader, the listener, reason to know that they can take comfort. So we've got 1 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 11. And you've got the headings on your sheets and some questions to help you grapple with what Isaiah is saying. But know that this is only the headlines. So he's posing, the Lord is suggesting these are the reasons why you can take comfort. But we're at the very start. We have yet to meet the servant. If you were to turn to the start of chapter 42, you'd hear God saying, "Behold, this is my servant." And so we begin to see in a couple of chapters' time the means by which it is possible. But at this stage, we're just being told, well, there is hope. And it needs to be fleshed out. We need to understand how that is possible. And as we go on, 40 through to 55, we'll be more and more convinced that the hope is accessible. It is true. These promises can be trusted because of the work of the servant. So I hope you enjoy getting stuck into these verses. And by the end of it, hopefully you're able to say, I can see why we can take comfort, and we need to then be persuaded more that that really is possible.